Nordic Cosmology. According to Norse mythology, the origin of the universe is nothingness, an immense formless abyss called Ginnungagap, within which the meeting of opposites gives life to the forces that animate and that, at the same time, destroy existence. At the beginning of time, when only this huge abyss existed, Niflheimr was created, the first of the 9 worlds and home to frost, desolation, and darkness. On the other hand, it was the only reality that could be created from a dark and lifeless well like the Ginnungagap. Even before it became the abode of the guardian of darkness Hel, the land of mists, this is the literal translation of Niflheimr, was lashed by winds of ice capable of cutting a person in two, and at its center either there was a gigantic well called Fergelmir, source of countless cosmic rivers, the Ilivagar that fall precipice into the cosmic void. In a parallel position opposite the Niflheim, to the south, beyond the abyss, another world was created, the very hot and dry Muspelheim, the kingdom of fire. Ruling this inhospitable region was Surtur, a giant of fire who by means of his flaming sword repelled anyone who dared to approach his realm. In this scenario dominated by 2 terrifying worlds in which everything was arid and desolate, life was unexpectedly born. Thanks to the freezing of cosmic rivers, the Ginnungagap joined the 2 opposite poles, the northern ice winds met with the scorching currents of the south, forming a sort of frost that melted becoming water and, as we know, life originates from water. The molten frost particles formed the giant Ymir, and it was no coincidence that the first being to arise from the oblivion of the times was Option a giant. These colossal figures, in fact, were the forces of chaos and darkness. They were considered enemies of the gods but, at the same time, their protectors. The giants possessed ancient wisdom that they valiantly guarded, their image absolved the indomitable power of the human unconscious in nature, such a force that, if deprived of the control of the spirit, would only lead to death and destruction. Their mission in the world was to regulate the passage of time, so the gigs will wait for the natural unfolding of events, from the beginning of the creation of the universe until the end of time. In Old Norse, they were referred to with the term Jotnar, which, etymologically speaking, recalls the verb devour. On the other hand, if time destroys everything and devours are present, it is precisely because of the giants who manage its unfolding. Ymir's main occupations, despite his immense size, were those of an ordinary newborn, eating and sleeping. Thus, while he slept, it is said that he used to sweat profusely, perhaps because of his size or distance from the icy Niflheim. However, from his sweat the first giants were generated, and, in the meantime, the other creature born from the primordial frost, the Oddhumla cow, licking the tops of the frozen mountains to feed itself, created the first man on earth. Buri, this is his name, was a handsome man, big and strong, but only, he independently generated his son Bor, a young boy who joined with the first woman Besla, daughter of one of the giants born from the sweat of Ymir. From the union of the 2 were born the first among the gods, were 3 sons who will revolutionize the cosmic balance, Odin, Villa, and Ve, beings endowed with great intelligence and strength, but eager for power. For a time, giants and gods managed to coexist peacefully, until the jealousy of not being a deity like Odin and his brothers struck Ymir, making the first clash in the universe inevitable. After a very hard encounter, the 3 brothers managed to kill Ymir with a blow to the head, drowning in blood all the lineage of ice giants he created. From this massacre, only 2 giants, Bergelmir, and his wife managed to survive, which will give life to a new lineage of ice giants. As had already happened at the dawn of time, only from death could live to be born, and so from the corpse of Ymir the world was born. Odin, Villa, and Ve had dragged the torn body of the giant to the center of the Ginnungagap. From its flesh, the earth was formed, and its blood was used to fill the terrestrial cavities, giving rise to the seas and lakes. From the bones, the mountain ranges were shaped. From the remnants of the brain the hair was used to create forests so dense that even the daylight was difficult to penetrate, and, finally, with the skull broken, the 3 brothers realized the celestial vault. According to legend, it is said that from the carcass of the giant flying on a precipice towards the infinite abyss, rotten bowels escaped from which worms had formed. By the will of Odin, it is said that these larvae took on the appearance of the intelligence and knowledge of human beings. However, the worms were not lucky enough to rise to such a level. In fact, they were relegated to the depths of the mountains, among the rocks that constituted what, later, will be called the Neithawalir, the kingdom of the dwarves. 4 of them were then brought to the surface with the task of supporting the celestial vault. Their names were Vestri, Norder, and Sudan, or East, West, North, and South. Odin, from the height of his cunning, was aware of the last 2 giants who survived the massacre. However, he did not hunt them down because he knew perfectly well that the fate of having to survive an existence marked by such misfortune was something much more painful than death itself. The 2 giants in the future lineage were given a home that was at the end of the known world, on the border with the sky, the Jotunheimer, a cold and dark place from which the giants will try to take revenge for the shame suffered in the time of Ymir. Odin will place as a natural barrier the river Ifir to plow the land of the giants from the divine world Asgard, placed in the heavens. Exactly at the center of the world was erected a huge fence made with the eyebrows of poor Ymir, which took the literal name of Midgard, the middle ground populated by the lineage of man. With the birth of the enclosure, protected from the invasions of the giants and placed in a place suitable for life to flourish, not too close to either Muspelheim or Niflheimer, Odin and his brothers went to the shore of the eternal ocean where they found 2 trunks. Carved and shaped following a precise pattern, the 2 trunks became a man and a woman who received the vital breath of Odin, who guaranteed them soul and life, while Villa and Ve infused into those forms of life respectively wisdom, the ability to move and the 5 senses. The man was called Oskur, Ash, while the woman Embla, Elm. From them the whole human race would descend. There are several legends that narrate the creation of the main stars. According to the Wedge, the sun and the moon are children of a giant who controls the passage of time. Instead, the Poetic Edda attributes their origin to men. We will refer to this second version, considered more reliable by mythologists. When Oscar and Embla begot humans, at one point one of their descendants had 2 wonderful children. To crown so much beauty, the child was called Sol the sun, while the male Mani, which, at the time, meant moon. Upon learning of such a superbia, the gods decided to punish the 2 infants, placing them on chariots carrying the sun and moon respectively. Their condemnation certainly did not end there. In addition to being forced to transport the 2 stars all over the globe for eternity, both were chased by Skoll and Hati, 2 gigantic hungry wolves who, however, will never be able to reach them, at least, until the end of time. In the immense starry sky, Mani felt so lonely that, during a full moon night, he thought of kidnapping 2 children who had lost their way to admire the nocturnal star reflected in a well. Bil and Hinki, these are the names of the 2 children, were tied to the lunar chariot, and we can still see them today when, looking at the moon, we notice the typical dark patches. It is then said, about the future divine lineage, that Odin and his brothers had designated their dwelling in the noblest of places, at the center of the universe but above, in heaven. This position places Asgard at the center of the other worlds of the Norse universe, vertically with respect to the land of mortals and horizontally with respect to the peripheries of space where the forces of darkness are confined. It is no coincidence, in fact, that Asgard was called by the ancient Norse and also the saint of the world. The gods, at a time when peace reigned in the 9 worlds, used to gather in a great council near a plain that was at the center of the new celestial kingdom, the plain of Idavalur. It was precisely from those assemblies that most of the decisions concerning the fate of the world were born. But the lineage descended from Odin and his brothers was not only able to make sudden decisions. Among them, there were blacksmiths and expert craftsmen who, in turn, gave the men the ability to manufacture weapons, tools, jewelry, and tools useful for fighting, cultivating, and trading. The first construction they built, in fact, was an immense workshop equipped with a furnace, from which they forged a hammer, pincers, and an anvil. Precisely these tools served to build the rest of the divine city, starting from the only 2 sanctuaries present in the whole universe. The first was Gladsheim, a majestic golden palace in which the 12 thrones reserved for the supreme gods had been forged, that was located near Valhalla, the paradise of heroes fallen in combat. According to legends, the latter was the residence that welcomed the valiant souls of the greatest warriors from Midgard. Their spirits were escorted by the Valkyries directly from the battlefield and were approved by Odin himself. The second shrine was called Vingolf, the place of all the female deities where peace will reign following the end of the world, the Ragnarok. This sanctuary will resist the fury of the destructive fire and become the final resting place of all good and just men. In addition to these 2 main strongholds, palaces dedicated to each deity were also erected, In the territory of Valaskjolf, the Rock of the Killed, the dwelling of Odin was built, patron of the dead and suicides who, by hanging themselves, consecrated his life. The god of light Balder resided in the brightest of the dwellings. Breidablik, Thor, the strongest of the gods and lord of Thrudvangr, paths of power, lived in the largest fortress of Asgard.